It's easy to look around and notice everything wrong in your city. In this podcast by Every Neighborhood Partnership, join Grace and Andrew as they invite friends, activists, pastors, leaders, and city workers to discover what's good in the neighborhood. Join us for insightful conversations that will encourage you to see your city and its people in a new way.
Hey everyone, this is Andrew. I'm really excited for you to hear this conversation with Dina. She recounts her journey of how the Christian community development world really opened up a new way of thinking about God's call for her life and has really been a radical reorienting of everything that she thought. I think you're going to learn some things, you're going to get exposed to some concepts, and really hear some practical takeaways from the small to the big of how you can implement, understand, and be a part of Christian community development. Well, welcome to What's Good in the Neighborhood. My name is Andrew Feil.
And I'm Grace Berg.
Well, we're excited. We're continuing in our kind of what we're, is a foundational series as Fresno as it is in heaven. And we're talking about this idea of Christian community development. And there's a whole thing we'll get into, a whole history, but this has been a community, a set of ideas and practices that has really shaped us, shaped our work in our city. And we're here to learn alongside a great friend. So today I want to introduce to you Dina Gonzalez-Pina. She has a long track record of work in our city and nationally as a national leader, and is currently leading MCC, Mennonite Central Committee, and is doing some amazing work. I have learned so much, and I think we've become co-partners and hopefully friends along the way.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But excited to hear a little bit more about your journey, how you got exposed to these ideas. You've actually been on the board of the organization called Christian Community Development Association. So we'd love to hear a little bit about that. But along the way, just like what is this framework, these tools, these ideas, how have they shaped your faith, your practice? And I think we'll have a great journey along the way. So
tell us a little bit about yourself, Dina.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, EMP, for putting this together.
Yeah.
Honestly, what a great venue for us to learn and hear each other and to really, in some ways, document our journey, right?
Yes, exactly.
So, again, Dina Gonzalez-Pina. I actually had no idea Fresno was here until it was time for me to head out to college. And someone had said there's a private Christian university called Fresno Pacific College. And so my parents were first generation field workers, farm workers in Delano, California. And so Fresno was just up the way. And they came and we did a learning tour, a little tour. And it was a faculty member there by the name of Dr. Leslie Mark, who had been a missionary to Mexico for 25 years. And he spoke to them in Spanish. And so my parents said, this is the bright place. We're bringing you here, right?
Yeah.
And so I was the first to go to college. I fell in love with Fresno, as everyone who I know has come from afar and have come, and you've stayed because there's so much good stuff happening here. So FPU became my foundation for my academic work, my sense of place where I understood my call a bit more. I came from a very Pentecostal background. So I had
Which is not
idea.
FPU, if anybody.
No.
A little Mennonite.
And I realized, okay, who are the Mennonites here, right? I think my world began to actually feel complete. So I had the presence of the Spirit in one way, but the work of justice and peacemaking that was somewhat missing in language, and I found it here. And then diving into CCDA work, I think CCD work has been just the way in which that has been carried out in my heart, my life work, and my community.
That's so good.
So let's talk a little bit about that. What is CCD philosophy, Christian Community Development a philosophy? Is it an organization? What is it? How did you get exposed to it?
It's all of it. It's what you want it to be, right? So I think actually CCD gave language again to a place, a community that had been doing some of the work but didn't have the actual tools, was doing it but didn't know that it really belonged in a place where it was even more complete with other tools. And so it's a philosophy. It's been around for over 30 years. If you know the founder, Dr. John Perkins, he himself was someone that experienced racism and violence. And I think there was a moment in his life where either he was going to respond with violence or have God just wrestle with that in his life and respond as a prophetic person. And so he's known as the Godfather of reconciliation. What a gift to the church, to us, to think through other ways of responding to community. Yeah.
You probably don't know this, but Grace and I both separately were able to go to Mississippi and hang out to Jackson and hang out with John Perkins, his daughters. They gave us a tour. We did, got to see some civil rights museums that were just, the Equal Justice Museum was unbelievable. And to learn and literally do a Bible study in his house at his feet was just unbelievable.
Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's amazing. It was really sweet because he's getting older and they're like, oh, we might not be able to see John. And he was like, I'm coming to dinner. I'm hanging out. He could not stay away. So it was very sweet to be in his presence. Yeah.
So John is kind of an exemplar. He, from what I know, he kind of coalesced this group of leaders who were Christians taking seriously God's call to not just overseas missions, right? And rejecting that kind of we just go, but our city and our city is in need of our engagement, but we also need we find our transformation in being part of the transformation of the city.
Yeah. I think he actually he began to think about how much we need each other. Mm. So there was a lot of silos in the communities, right? People do God, do church, but do it separately. And he's one that's wait a minute, but you love Jesus and I love Jesus. And then how come we haven't had reconciliation? Mm. And part of that was we didn't even discover each other. Mm. We had no idea who each other's stories were. So he begins to draw us together in a way that we hear each other, we understand each other, and we understand that we are not complete without one another, right? Mm. So, yeah. And then, he drove some changes, some real big issues that were not quite easy to handle. I remember going to a conference years ago on behalf of Fresno Pacific. They called Christian higher ed into a deeper dialogue. And he began to address issues of systemic problems. What the heck was that? Mm. And he's like, yeah, well, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. But if you teach him how to fish, and everybody's like, yes, you teach him for a lifetime. And he goes, yeah, but who owns the pond? So it was more than just teaching people how to fish. It was about, where are the resources? Are they being shared resources? Have they been hoarded by communities? In which ways are we better when we share them together? So new concepts that were still kind of not quite acceptable, he began to draw us into that. That is what being in community with each other means, right?
Yeah, that staying curious aspect. And even him posing that as a question and allowing that to sit with a group. It's really good. So that happens in Jackson, Mississippi, right? John and that group, it starts there. How does it get to Fresno? And I kind of want to pose that to both of you because I know you've both been impacted by that.
Yeah.
But how has Christian community development concepts shaped Fresno today and nonprofit service work here?
Well, I think we have to name some of the folks that were bridges for that, right? So we have the famous HBs, right? No one can think about this work in the Central Valley here without thinking of H. And then thinking of people like Randy White, right? Thinking of people that really laid some foundation and began to say, this is not just for my generation, but how do we now begin to shape the generation coming? And then shoulder tapping, how do we create space for listening and learning and communal spaces? And so I think those I would say were some of the primary godfathers per se in the Central Valley of this work. Again, either it was already being done, but it was in silo. Mm. And so they began to say, how do we tap into each other's communities and begin to think about being a more holistic community.
Yeah, and I think what I began to see, and if you want to maybe pull up or give us some context of what are those principles of Christian community development, as I came to Fresno, what I came into, I was a missions pastor at a church here in town. And through that experience, somebody said, go to this conference. I'm like, great. Yeah, I got some conference money. I'll go. I went and I go, this is the language. This is the community. I didn't know I had experienced things in missions and just like, I feel dirty. This doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel holistic. I don't know if I'm actually making change, but I didn't know why or what was behind that. Christian community development gave me the language and some frameworks and some tools. But then what I got involved in and what stuck was people, right? People that have said, I'm going to commit my life to this street, this neighborhood for the next 15, 20 years, a radical change. And so now I'm in a group that's, crazy diverse, talking about issues I had no even framework for. But it was a community that was trying to love Jesus with all they have and pursued God's justice and peace in this city. So tell us, for again, folks, there may be folks joining that don't have any idea what Christian community development is. So what are some, as the movement, as an institution formed, what are some of those like principles or practices or ideas?
Yeah. So some of them, obviously these were named years back. This is not the modern language that we are already shifting to. But years back, you think about 20, 30 years ago, in which ways do we get to draw a radical shift? So the idea of reconciliation, we've named about that. And really the idea of reconciliation also meant racial reconciliation. Let's name that, because we are real comfortable in our own communities, but not very comfortable in racially diverse communities. And so how do we hear each other, understand each other's pain, and then the contribution of the way history has laid things out in very unjust ways. And so reconciliation meant...
And the way the church has gone along with those systems and structures, right?
Totally.
The church has not lived into Paul's admonition to not be divided. It's just said, we're good. We like this division.
As a matter of fact, I think I would say we would be blamed for... we would have to say we lament all the ways in which we missed opportunities.
That's right.
To change that.
Dina.
Redistribution is really one that I think is at the heart of it, but we've not really accomplished. Redistribution is so much harder because it's a change of the heart and then a change of maybe the pocketbook or power. And those are some of the more difficult things to talk about, right? So redistribution of resources. Relocation, to some folks, this was an easy one because it meant I cannot understand folks who are in this part of the street until I go and I live among them. So it meant an intentionality to go and say, this is my neighborhood too.
Yeah.
And I actually have power in DC, at the city. I can begin to name things that are not named for folks who are feeling very disempowered, or I can create a pathway for them to be heard. I can call out and use my whiteness in some way, use my influence, my position, my power, my education in ways that are more holistically impacting a bigger community or a community of injustice. Leadership, oh my God, such an important one. How do we now prepare leadership development so that folks who, when they get to power, they can use power more equitably? Like that's such a critical part. Development's an important part because we as people need to, but development means also like who's not at the table, right?
Right.
How do we hear? How do we understand who's not here? Empowerment, it's the younger folks who are coming up the pipeline who are going to be the leaders, the mayors of tomorrow. If they're not understanding things now, how are they going to function in a more just way?
Well, and I think empowerment was really crucial for me as I was a missions pastor at a predominantly white church. Like we're used to giving things, but we know that doesn't have, when we don't, that actually can disempower folks. So I had to go through a whole learning journey to be like, how do we actually come alongside and partner with those in our neighborhoods that like they are the answer to this city's issues. But if I just give stuff or if I take all the credit, that ain't going to do anything. So what does empowerment mean? That's a really key feature. And
an example of that would be probably the idea of charity, right? So charity makes me feel good because I give.
Yeah.
And that person gets in that moment, but there's no maybe dignity with it. They didn't get a chance to work for it and find a way. So really empowerment is about what does people need? How do I respond? And how do we get to a better place?
How we do it together, like you said.
Yeah, John
Absolutely.
Perkins has that quote, you don't give someone dignity, you affirm it. So yeah, it's that. It's good.
Church-based. So we do this work because it's a long journey, because God has transformed us. We've received grace. And so out of that grace, we can call each other into a place of betterment, right? Into a place of more Jesus-like. It's the base to be where we already have equity. Like we all have equal access to God, equal access to his word. So because the church has that, it does have the potential to go the long run versus halfway down the journey. So church base is so important to us. Listening to the community, wow. What a wonderful part of philosophy. Yeah, I can't do for you until I sit with you. I understand you. And then you tell me what it is you need, because otherwise it's what I want to do versus what we can do together, right? And the last thing is just a holistic approach. And not just, you don't need just Jesus. You need a house. You need a place. You need a job. Like what ways in which we look at God's kingdom is beyond church buildings. Yeah.
It does everything. I love the idea of shalom. And I think that's that holistic piece of like, does everything work in people, with people, and for people? It's holistic. Like that's everything. God's about redeeming all things, not just one thing. So those philosophies, how have they weaved into like your journey here in Fresno?
Yeah.
I know you're a pastor, to your leadership. Like how have they shaped you as a person?
Yeah. I think again in my first work in Fresno as a professional, I worked in Fresno Pacific University. I work with young people and trying to get them to dream with them about their potential and fulfilling their goals and sharpening their skills and becoming professionals. Sometimes I had to convince their parents that they could come and they could, not work at the, grocery store down the street, but really invest 4 years so that tomorrow they could actually have a better future. So for 23 years, I did this work of just investing in young people in the Central Valley. About 10 years into that, I began to think about the global world as well. How do I take students abroad to see the other part of the world where God's at work already and join him in that? And so those global learning tours, study tours had incredible impact in their lives. And so many of them are global thinkers in the city. And it's so important because as the world comes here, we're already global thinkers versus just centralized to us here. But we can connect with their pain, their needs, their struggles, whatever it is that they bring with them. And I think that we're better prepared to respond because of it.
And tell me about your pastoral work and even now a little bit about MCC and what you're doing there.
Yeah. So I'm starting my 4th year as the executive director for West Coast MCC. Mennonite Central Committee has been around just over 100 years now. But on the West Coast...
Can't get away from those Mennonites.
I know those Mennonites. So I become a Mennonite. How about that one? You're right. So I think part of what we want to do is, one of the philosophies is listening to the community. About 20 years ago, MCC was listening to the communities. And what they've discovered is that a lot of our Hispanic churches, they had folks in their communities that needed some legal assistance. So they were here, but they were either victims of fraud. They'd go to someone and trust them with their documentation, and they took their money, but they didn't help them through the process. And so we kept hearing stories and stories from pastors saying, can somebody do something where it's trustworthy? And so MCC stepped into that. We've been doing this for over 20 years now. But so we have direct services, right? So what are the needs in the community? We begin to understand that fear is not helpful. But a lot of our communities live in fear of being separated, fear of deportation, fear of not being accepted. I mean, I think about even this weekend as we've had a number of folks come in from Venezuela, right? Yeah. So they've come in with needs, they've come in with trauma, they come in with a desire to have a better life, just like everybody else has, right? But they often get to be targeted, people's hate, misunderstanding, so not quite Christ-like, right? So the church steps in and says, we see you. You are made in the image of Christ. You complete us in the fully understanding of God's kingdom.
Wow.
And so as we respond to that, then we begin to hear their pain and their stories, and the healing begins to happen. but there's also this legal entity of that, right? Where are people able to process their documentation? So MCC steps into that.
Oh my gosh, we could have sat in that. I could sit there for a little bit, but we'll move on. This year, so Christian Community Development Association has a conference, and this year we talked about Psalm 85:10, and that message version talks about this idea of truth and justice meeting in the street. And we've talked about these values of what it means to like take on this philosophy of CCD, but I don't know, like, what does it look like as a believer who's maybe hearing this for the first time and going, that is completely different than what I've been taught, like kind of what Andrew's describing, like my missions background or how I thought about service or charity. What's like a first step to embrace truth and justice and let them, I think the second part of that verse says, and let them kiss, like whole living and right living embrace.
I love this scripture. I also love the scripture where it says, like, thy kingdom come in the Lord's Prayer. Mm-hmm. Thy will be done on earth. I want you to know that some of these were kind of new because growing up, it was like when we get to heaven, right?
Right.
That's the place where we get to enjoy and rejoice before God. But to begin to understand that actually thy will be done on earth is in scripture.
Right now.
Right? So I get to act upon that here. Truth and justice gets to be acted upon here. It isn't foreign. It shouldn't be foreign to the Christian, right? The follower of Jesus. So the idea of truth and justice is we begin to think about, so Christ is truth, right? His justice can be carried out through his community, his church. That means when we see injustice, right? We begin to name what is injustice before we can see injustice. What is injustice? Injustice is hunger. Injustice is people that have so much and people have nothing. Like that's injustice, right? Injustice is your voice is heard, but not yours. Injustice is you belong, but you don't. Your injustice is legalization gives you credibility, whether you're human or not. No. So truth is that we are all made in the image of God. Truth is that we belong to each other. Truth is that we can't understand God's fullness until we're able to understand other. And so I think about that. I think about when I stop and I listen about, especially think about these immigrant communities. Most of us were a generation away from that or 2 generations away from that. Think about Ellis Island. Think about even all the ways in which people populated this land, right? Unless you are First Nations and Native American, like your communities, right, were here. And truth is that some of us love the fact that our grandparents came, but we don't love the fact that somebody else is coming. And that's really not of the Father. We are one in him, right? So I think part of this idea is for us to begin to understand, what is your story? What are your persecution? What is happening with you that you have to be displaced in your community? And as we begin to hear these stories, we begin to get rid of all the ways in which we've distanced ourselves from them or which we want to hoard our own resources. And part of it is too, like, we have a calling, go ye into the world and preach the gospel. Sometimes the Lord allows those people to come here so that we can be the truth, right, to that community. So
yes. I loved at CCDA this last year. There was a speaker who works with a lot of undocumented folks and a lot of immigrants. And he was actually talking about the folks that are coming here are actually evangelizing us because most of these folks are coming are very faith-filled and they operate out of that worldview.
Oh, yes.
And so they're actually rediscipling America in the process.
They prayed the whole way. Think about it.
Yeah, a very different perspective.
You prayed the whole way. On your way, you're asking God daily for him to provide. Faith is in action. Like, that's what we've discovered. These people are living and trusting God for their daily bread. When was the last time we did that? Mm-hmm. You know, our pocketbooks have a little resources, so we don't have to pray for the daily bread. But they have a faith that is so different than we have, and we can grow from understanding that.
Gosh, I feel like I hear in that, like, the challenge is don't let something just be a hot button issue, but like walk with people. Like whether that's immigration or any other thing that feels divisive or could cause contention. What would it look like if instead you led with that person being made in the image of God and just leading with dignity and affirming it and hearing someone's story as a person? I feel like sometimes as Christians, it's easy to hear like, well, this doesn't work and that doesn't, we get caught up in what we think is the right mode to see it through. And God and Jesus have made it very clear, like, these are my kids. And so lead with that first, and the rest will follow.
I think that's that idea of relocation, right? It's like Michelle Warren wrote a book called Proximity Matters. And it's like that is one of the undergirding really philosophies that has made CCD so transformative, because it's about presence and it's about proximity. I'm going to turn the question to you, Grace. So you're new to Fresno-ish now, but then you've now hung out with John Perkins. Like, that's a rare thing. How has your imagination, your faith, how has Christian community development and this like community kind of changed you, messed with you? Well,
messed me up real bad. No, it's been amazing. It's been really transformative. I think, this last conference was my first. And I think what struck me was the ability that this very diverse group of people had to let everyone's ideas and concepts be heard at the same table. That was like pretty mind-blowing for me. And growing up in pretty conservative Protestantism, it's been life transforming to then also like learn how to, I think it's easy to just think it's right. And this is the truth and that's what it is. And so to then be challenged with other people's ideas, and the goal isn't necessarily to be like, are they right? Am I wrong? But to let it sit and just give it back to Jesus and the Holy Spirit and go, okay, God, like, you made me and you made this person, and what do you want to do in that? And often he loves to just work in relationship because he's a relational God. And so I think
I hear the beloved community of like MLK. It's like it's not about this one perspective. It's the diversity of us together, working together.
Oh yeah. Yes. It's been amazing.
I think about the enemy has already kept us apart for so long, right? There's so much ground that we've lost because we've been living in these little silos. But you're right, CCDA is the place where there is theological difference. There's urban, there's rural, there's different ethnicities, there's folks from different sides of whatever issue is. But the goal is not, to emphasize difference. The goal is, what does Jesus want to do through us together?
That's good.
How do we work at issues of housing? How do we work at issues of education or racial justice or in whatever category it lies? And it means that I think because the focus is that about the community, then when we serve with each other, the differences really begin to fall apart.
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it's been. Thank you so much, Dina.
You're welcome.
I feel like we could sit with you all day and talk about this. I hope that people who are listening are kind of wrecked by it today. I hope so. I want them to leave and be like, what? How do I view mission? How do I view charity? How do I view service? How do I view my city? And so even just as we go, what would be the next right step for someone listening today if they were like, how do I learn more? How do I get involved? What does it look like to take on this philosophy like in my own life?
Yeah. Well, good question. I think we all have little passions that God puts in us, right? So there's obviously the professional work that we get to do, but there are these lenses and this passion that he puts in us. So what is God doing already? What is he drawing you to? Single moms, that issue, foster kids, in which ways? The one that we at MCC are focusing on primarily right now, we're working on restorative work. So there's a real emphasis around high schoolers and elementary schools, kids that don't have tools on how to communicate. So we have staff members out teaching people how to communicate without fighting or using guns. Look at the gun issue that we have. Incredible. So we've got staff already like responding to restorative work. So what is that thing, right? What's that passion? We just come up from a conversation this morning on peacemaking and the whole idea of Palestine-Israel peace and peacemaking in our global context as well as in our neighborhood. What does that look like when two neighbors don't get along? In the city of Reedley, where we have some of our offices, I mean, we just had an incredible murder, right? Because two neighbors didn't get along, and so stealing stuff. And so how do we become light in our neighborhoods? That to some of us, peacemaking is so critical. But I would say to the staff, whoever it is listening, what is God calling you? What's that little passion? Is it responding to hunger? Is it homelessness? Is it single moms? Is it immigration? Is it this? What is he responding to? Or where has he placed you that you need to open your eyes and see, what does my neighborhood need? And then that becomes the place where you go find some resources. CCDA has got a great resources.org. And our next conference is in October in Portland, Oregon.
Yeah.
So,
and if you're a Fresno person, Dina and I are part of this. We're actually figuring out how to create again a local, because I think it's easy in a just, this is like insider baseball here, but like CCDA as an organization is 30 years old. Perkins is about, he's 90 something, right? So we're in a generational shift. It's easy to just keep looking backwards. We got to look forward.
Oh, yes.
Who are the next folks that we're inviting to this community here in Fresno, across the nation? So we're figuring out how to do that. We are now a local network within CCDA. Fresno is. MCC, EMP are lead on that. And we're actually going to have some meetings coming up. If you go, we'll put in the link, but the CCD Collective has a Facebook page. We'll be posting stuff there as we kind of figure that out. But locally, you could join there at the CCD Collective. And then again, right, ccda.org, you can join their newsletter. And one of our staff actually just wrote a blog that was on their website.
That's right.
Yeah, it was good. If anybody want to learn more about MCC, how would they?
mcc.org. We're on the West Coast. And so, yeah.
Good. And we'll link all that too in our show notes so that people can follow up with you. Thank you, Dina.
Thank you, guys. What an honor. Thank you so much. All right. Blessings.
Bye. Thanks for tuning in. If you want to find out more about EMP, you can visit us at everyneighborhood.org or follow us at EMP Fresno. Every Neighborhood Partnership and this podcast exists to activate, equip, mobilize, and transform here in Fresno and beyond. If you liked what you've heard, please share and review what's good in the neighborhood wherever you listen. We'll see you next time.